afternoon. Our next session is a book discussion. The book is a very fascinating book called Vajpayee, The Years That Changed India. It is a great pleasure that the author of the book, Mr. Shakti Sinha, is with us this afternoon. Mr. Shakti Sinha is the director of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Policy Research and International Studies. In conversation with him would be Ms. Pinky Anand. Pinky Anand is a senior advocate and is a former additional Solicitor General of India. So without much ado, Pinky, over to you. Please discuss the book with Mr. Shakti Sinha.
Thank you very much, Raj. Indeed, it is a pleasure to be here with all of you. And this is, of course, not our first occasion. We've had earlier occasions. And it wouldn't have given me any more pleasure than to discuss a book which focuses on Vajpayee ji, somebody who has been a mentor to us, to me in particular, somebody who we have idealized, somebody who is stretching right from the 1970s till now and will continue to do so in future. With this, Shakti, of course, is somebody we have known, I have dealt with, I have discussed. It's indeed a pleasure that he could write a book on Vajpayee ji, which covers some part of it. So I guess at some point you will find possibly a sequel coming down to the book, which traces some more parts of his career, some more parts of his understanding of Vajpayee ji. Shakti, welcome, and I can't see you, so maybe if I could see you, it would be nice.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, that's delighted. Of course, I see some of the saffron colors there, and indeed, it's a delight. You look the same. It's as if you have never changed right through your years. By coincidence, Shakti, I am in Ranchi, in fact, in Jamshedpur. And I did notice from your book. So on a very first front, I believe you first met Vajpayee ji in Ranchi or saw him there. So I would like to go back right to the 1970s when you met Vajpayee ji in Ranchi. And what did you think then? We saw what you thought of him a little later, but let's go back to the 1970s and your impressions of Vajpayee ji.
First time I've been asked that question. I grew up in Ranchi, and politically I had started feeling quite, I was very young at that stage, but I was politically fairly mentally active. And I was leaning away from the Congress quite strongly and in favor of the Jansangh. And then Mr. Vajpayee had come for an election meeting, and we evening with a very big gathering, but Mr. Vajpayee spoke very well. Am I audible, or are you having some problems with my voice?
There is some breakage, very minor, but there is some breakage. Maybe somebody could look into that. Yeah.
It was amazing because I'd heard of him for so many years. I remember he was the chairman of the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee, and I was very keen on listening to him and very keen on seeing they had formed an alliance called the Mahagathbandhan. This is not the first Mahagathbandhan that we saw in 2009, 17 or 19. We had seen it earlier on. And Mr. Vajpayee was mesmerizing. He held the crowd in enthrall. It started raining, and he says, Indra Bhagwan has welcomed me to your lovely city, etc. We were all excited. But as I write in the book, when the elections came, it was not Indra Bhagwan on this side, the other Indra Gandhi, who actually swept the election, breaking all our hearts. But I was completely mesmerized and completely, because he explained things in a very simple language. The audience, he was working with the audience and explaining political things, which I found very different from being lectured to rather than explained. And that was my first very strong impressions of him. Little did I know that years later I would spend a lot of time with him.
You're right. I think whenever we have met Vajpayee ji and worked with him, the one thing that you realize is that he developed a rapport with the people. So it was really a communication rather than addressing from the position of leadership. And that went towards making his persona what he did, and everybody looked at that for what life was all about. Now, Shakti, as Vajpayee ji was known as one of the most balanced philosophers in politics. However, he did have critical thoughts. He did have independent thoughts. He had very firm views, considered a moderate, but nonetheless this. Now, there was this dichotomy in Vajpayee's personality, which you have highlighted in some parts of your book, in fact, throughout your book, from point to point. How do you think he actually managed to balance that dichotomy? And I have a second question on that. How do you think that led towards the country's makeup and the makeover of the country?
It's a very challenging question in the sense that politics is the art of the possible. So you have your idealizations, you have your what you want to do, like, but you understand that now that Pakistan exists, I have to deal with Pakistan. There's sort of a balancing job that we do throughout, because you cannot give up your ideals, but you can't live in a world which is a make-believe world. So, what I feel is that Vajpayee is underestimated as a politician. And I use the word politician in a good sense of the term. Politics to me is a good word. Without politics, there is no democracy. There is no rule of law. You need politics for that. We don't understand that. Good economic policies come from politics. So he was a good politician in the sense that he would envelope, but where he realized that the envelope could not be pushed, then you find a compromise. So it's a dynamic situation. It's not a rigid situation that this is what I want to do. I won't compromise anything, or I'll give up everything. No. So, like when India was formed in 1998, when the government was to be sworn in, party national agenda of governance. Now, the BJP's three key points, called the Ram Janmabhoomi Uniform 70, really the last, which Vajpayee was very committed to, was these three the other parties. Parties was India going nuclear. So he put India going nuclear on the agenda, agreed to leave the other aside. Hidden agenda hai. He said, nahi, hidden nahi hai. It is very much my agenda. I do not have the numbers for it. So, it's a kind of a dynamic situation rolling all along. And therefore, I would not think of politics. Circumstances change, you change, your numbers go down, you're a weak position, you're in a strong position. And therefore, you keep trying to make these changes. But politically, you must communicate all. Point is that if I'm not getting my message across, even the best of intentions land up in failures. So in that sense, I would answer both your questions combined.
No, you are right, Shakti. I think you might be a bureaucrat and a former bureaucrat, but you managed to understand politics very well and you translate it very well. So politics is a dynamic process, of course, which changes. And Vajpayee ji was, while being a moderate and while being one of the most liberal thinkers as far as Indian politics is concerned, nonetheless, there were times that he took a view which was possibly leaning towards national integration, national security, and of course, the reality, the ground realities and dealing with people. His forte was that he could deal with people and with various agencies. Tell me, what do you think? Let's go back a bit to 1996. Now, you write in your book about Vajpayee ji's agreeing to take on oath as prime minister, even though he was not comfortable. Why do you think basically Vajpayee ji agreed to do that, or why do you think he was uncomfortable? Do you think he was right to be uncomfortable? Because that was a starting point as far as the BJP is concerned. So it's a very significant point in terms of time.
Because I was very puzzled when you don't have the numbers and you had 160 of the BJP and you had the Samta Dal, and that is it. Then the Akalis agreed. You're still 100 short. 100 short is a long number. But in retrospect, I realized it made a lot of sense. If I look at the Indian politics from 1996 to 2021, that's almost 25. Formula One racing of Indian politics. Either the governments have been led by the BJP or have been formed with the explicit purpose of keeping the BJP out. So the Congress has gone now, it is now the BJP is the pole position. And had he not taken over in 1996, it was signed that the BJP is not ready to come to the center of Indian politics. It shifted one way, BJP had to establish its position that I am now the fulcrum. Either you're on one side of me or you're on the other side of me, but I'm in the center of Indian politics. And therefore, to take the oath, to go vote. But as DMK leader Mursuli Malan said in Parliament, we were approached, but it was a remarkable statement from a person from the other side. You had to take that position to, one, try to build support, but otherwise to demonstrate that now it is the BJP in Indian politics. Next two governments, they were formed in the United Front. Keep the BJP out. So, it's a very important point, journey inflection point in Indian politics.
I see what you mean, Shakti. I mean, one couldn't disagree with it until you make your presence felt. And BJP, of course, had to come in to make one's presence felt. Otherwise, you would be out of the scene. What is there in front of you, for whatever period of time it might be, is something which does change and has changed the course of Indian political scenario. And you're right that since then, they've been there in whichever fashion, but BJP is a significant feature in the governing of the nation. And I think we continue to do so, and we will continue to do so for a good period of time. And that does mark the turning point of history as far as BJP is concerned. So Vajpayee ji might, as a moderate politician, have thought that the numbers are not there. But he, as usual, that dichotomy we were talking about between what he thought and what needed to be done. And he did exactly that, what was needed to be done, as much as he did in various other spheres. Let's come to an era.
You explain it. You explain it better than I do.
Shakti, I have no pretensions of being able to do that.
No, but being a good lawyer, being a good advocate really helps you put that. So I think you put it very rightly. I put it very rightly. But yeah, sorry for the interruption. Yeah.
No, Shakti. There's no interruption. I think this is a conversation, and this is meant to actually mark. And we've had the fortunate part of having worked with Vajpayee ji, right, for the last as many number of years that we've been around. So have seen him grow, and have seen to, as I said in the earlier part, admire him in that capacity. And that is what one looks to, the good politician who rules the world in his various ways. Anyway, so to come to one period of 1984 to 1996, now that was marked by turmoil. You had, in fact, of course, it ended up in 1996. I went back a little. So you had Rajiv Gandhi, who mishandled Shah Bano at that point of time. You had the Satanic verses, which were banned Salman Rushdie, and the reopening of the locks, which created some stir in the nation. So you basically had a start of censorship era, so to say, as well as other turmoils in the country. You had Bofors also, which came in at that point of time. Congress lost the elections in 1989, and BJP, of course, started gaining ground. How do you think all these changes affected Indian politics?
It comes with 415 MPs. In parliament in opposition is the Telugu Desam. And yet to go to a situation where you are creating problems for yourself and for the country, creating turmoil unnecessarily, complete turmoil was being created. That obviously led to a situation of great instability. People suddenly became cynical about politics. Buffer. We don't know who has taken money, but we know it's not an Indian who has taken the money. Well, if you don't know who has taken the money, how can you certify that it's not an Indian who took the money? So, that allowed the BJP, and again, thanks to Shah Banu and the Janambhoomi and Salman Rushdie, you created this space where you thought you would occupy, but why should you occupy it? The BJP was naturally placed to occupy the Hindutva space, So Rajiv Gandhi, in that sense, in his lack of wisdom, in his lack of understanding of politics, in his lack of understanding of India, God bless him, fusion which allowed the BJP to grow. But you didn't ask me the question, but I'll add to it one thing. It caught Vajpayee by surprise, and therefore, if you notice in that period, he's no more at the center of BJP politics. He's slowly on the. Because even he could not cope up with the kind of change India was going through, unleashed by Rajiv Gandhi's immaturity. And that allowed the BJP to emerge, not yet as the leading, yes, as the potentially with 85 seats on its own in the elections versus the Janata Dal's much larger 140. But Janata Dal had everybody in it and the breakaway Congress. So I think that was an emergence which shifted Indian politics. Even though Congress comes back to power, you can see that the pendulum is now slipping away from the Congress and towards a little more right.
Shakti, as you said, I like the pendulum word, because pendulum always gains momentum. So I think when the pendulum starts swinging, then the momentum is raised, and the momentum obviously took BJP forward. Let's change track a little to Jayalalitha. In your book, you mentioned about Vajpayeeji's meeting with Jayalalitha, and how, in fact, you thought that Jayalalitha was a difficult woman. Of course, nobody thinks otherwise, possibly. A grand woman, but nonetheless a difficult woman. You mentioned some of her idiosyncrasies also, including the fact that from six she turns out to be a bread earner and retains each and every item of her belongings. But anyway, that's a side story. You said when she came out after she met Vajpayee, she gave vocal support to the BJP. Why do you think Jayalalitha was difficult? And why do you think this shift happened? You know, we've noticed this kind of shift when senior politicians and leaders of the world and of the country meet each other. We've noticed several other changes. I won't go into all of them, but you know the ones I'm referring to. However, in particular, this entire shifting over because it meant a considerable support to the BJP and a considerable change of alliance.
You were never what is she going to say? You were never sure what is she going to do. Very troubling. Yes, she met Mr. Vajpayee. He listened to her very patiently, explained what he could do, what he could not. Go back to Chennai and swing again. Basically, happening. There is some audio problem. Vasant, hear me? No.
I can hear you, but there is some disturbance in some word breakages, I'm afraid. I'm able to put the things together, but I'm not sure how it's working for the others. As long as it's working for the others, I'm able to manage.
So the trouble is my end.
So it's fine
Uh,
in our end
Jala
also.
is fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aditya. He was earlier there as MGR's number two. MGR was the boss. Everybody was supine in front of him. Her situation was the same. She did not equal. So she could not bargain as an equal. And therefore, when somebody questioned what she said, Mr. Ramakrishna Hegde questioned her in an India meeting and she blew her top because she could not take this feeling isolated in Tamil Nadu. Even the DMK government wanted to send her to jail, which is true actually, but for good reason. It could be very, very unreasonable. And yet, at times, when you explain things to her, she could be very, very reasonable. And therefore, very mercurial, very, very difficult to deal with. Mr. Vajpayee, and within a week, completely flip over and make the most critical of statements. So it was a very difficult situation all the time.
You know, we have these various personalities, and I think that's what really appeals to all of us, the different kind of people and the different kind of interaction and the different kind of dealing with each other these people have, and how it shifts the entire face of politics, how it engages in conversation with people. Let me go to 1998, Shakti. When Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji was going to form the government in 1998, the President Narayanan asked him for a written mandate. Now, I'll bring in this little portion as a lawyer also. Do you really think that the president went beyond his mandate to ask for a written consent? Why do you think he did that? And do you think it was right? And I'm sorry, I'll just interrupt you just to continue. Today, all these situations have become very much in the reckoning. Therefore, the importance of this.
When the election results came out, the NDA had 251 out of 270 majority. There was nobody asking to form a government. We Narasimha minority governments because there were no other takers. In 1989, the Congress actually had 194 MPs against National Front's 140. And yet, Vajpayee should have been asked to form the government. Then the NDA moved to 260 plus. You're just 5-6 short of numbers. No, you're not being asked to form a government. And then for the first and the only time, partners was asked to give letters of support. Matter. You have contested the elections together as one entity, the National Democratic Alliance, with one manifesto. Campaigned Atal Bihari for Prime Minister, Vajpayee for Prime Minister. Mamta has campaigned on that. All of you have campaigned Vajpayee as Prime Minister. We are the NDA. We are staking a claim. Where is the need to ask for a letter? Subsequently, also, nobody has ever asked for a letter like this. The letter from a political party is a meaningless piece of paper. Yes, President Venkatraman, when VP Singh's government fell, Chandrasekhar was to form a government with Rajiv Gandhi's support. He asked Rajiv Gandhi, I can't have instability. Will you give me a letter of support for Chandrasekhar that he will support his government till the next elections? Well, he gave 3 months. So what is the point of a letter? What the letter did was make things. Suddenly parties with not just Jayalalitha with her 18 MPs, but parties even with 2 and 3 MPs started bargaining. Now I've got a fresh chance of bargaining now. Those alliances settled. So I think it was meant to weaken Vajpayee's position. It was meant to put NDA in difficulty. And that is why I'm extremely critical of the letter. It was well beyond the press. You know, in the parliament, in the parliamentary democracy, numbers are decided on the floor of the House or Raj Bhavans, well established. If there is a rival claimant, you make an assessment. Here, there is not even a rival claimant for it. Where is the question of asking for letters? Instead of straight away issuing a letter, I'm inviting you to form a government. Because you're most likely is this person alone. Nobody else is even contesting the claim. So that is why I felt that the president, to me, well beyond constitutional, to me, it was a constitutional impropriety. I'm very
I knew the answer. As lawyers go, we have an advantage which we can always carry forward. And yes, you're right. The floor test is the only way that a democracy can and will function, and particularly with a pre-poll alliance. You had a pre-poll alliance, there's no question of asking. Had it been post-poll, it's another situation altogether. But yes, a striking issue which you have, of course, addressed extremely well. You know, Shakti, I'll come to another off-take. I mean, Vajpayee's theme, we've been talking a bit on the political front and in his ideologies and his concept and his interaction with leaders. Let us talk about one of the features that has marked Indian history, and that is something which I think is nuclear capability. I think Pokhran really brought about a change of the Indian standing, and it carries on and goes from strength to strength in whichever ways. But just coming back to the nuclear philosophy, again, each of this has a great intake into it. We all know that, as you said in your book, in fact, at page 90, I can read it out. But what you said is that Pakistan tested Gauri's missile and found that it had a very long range, 1500 kilometer range, etc. It could target, as we all thought, Pakistan and Calcutta. So let me take it from your book for a minute. It would make it more interesting to go from there. So you say here, meanwhile, Pakistan muddied the waters on 6th April by announcing that it had tested the Gauri missile. This was supposed to be an improved version of Hatf with a range of 1500 kilometers capable of striking key Indian cities like Kolkata and Chennai. The announced payload was 700 kilograms, which made it apparent that the new missile was meant to carry a nuclear warhead. The veteran security analyst Jasjit Singh, in his piece on Times of India, was unequivocal in his belief that Gauri was a product of Sino-Pakistan collaboration. In his own words, obviously, Pakistan is legitimizing its missile program as indigenous. And I think that is what made Vajpayee more than determined to proceed with this, because to protect our borders and to take a very decisive step. And Vajpayee says, we don't need nuclear enabled certification. We don't need validation. I think that was a key point in Vajpayee's philosophy, and when he took a line which was so important for national security, national considerations. So he says there, no validation. And I think this forms a part of his psyche that goes a long way. Just before you answer that, I will put to you one of the conflicts that Vajpayee, as usual, faced. So while he took a very strong line on nuclear capability and build us to be a strong future, he says in his poem, which Vajpayee is very well known for, of course, किसी रात को मेरी नींद अचानक उजड़ जाती है, आंख खुल जाती है, मैं सोचने लगता हूँ कि जिन वैज्ञानिकों ने अणुशस्त्रों को आविष्कार किया है, वे हिरोशिमा नागासाकी के भीषण नरसंहार के समाचार सुनकर रात को कैसे सोए होंगे, क्या उन्हें एक क्षण के लिए सही ये अनुभूति नहीं हुई कि उनके हाथों जो कुछ हुआ अच्छा नहीं हुआ? यदि हुई तो वक्त उन्हें कटघरे में खड़ा नहीं करेगा, किंतु यदि नहीं हुई तो इतिहास उन्हें कभी माफ नहीं करेगा. So here, Shakti, I ask for an invitation for a comment from you.
It's, basically, Vajpayee to nuclear weapons. He was unequal weapons. That poem you read is very clear. He condemns nuclear weapons. Then of 1967, we said that these 5 countries can have nuclear weapons. All the others cannot have it. So others have, you don't have. Your neighbor China, in occupation of your territory, has nuclear weapons, you have none. And then China and Pakistan get together and develop a nuclear and missile cooperation. This is a threat to India. Pakistan is now openly testing its missiles. Raps, but the world knew about it. People had been convicted in Netherlands for smuggling of nuclear rings and all to Pakistan. So Pakistan had a nuclear program supported by the Chinese and a missile program. In that circumstances, India had to test, not because India wanted to use nuclear weapons, but India wanted to deter Pakistan and China from using theirs. So you need it as a deterrence. And therefore, even today, our philosophy is very, very clear. We want the minimum deterrence required to protect ourselves. We will not use it first against a non-nuclear weapon state. So we are very clear. We are against nuclear weapons. Our first choice is please remove all nuclear weapons. But why should people I feel threatened by, who are a security risk to me, a security challenge to me, have it and I don't have it, and I can be nuclear blackmailed? So India cannot be blackmailed through the threat of nuclear weapons, and therefore India needed its own. But we will leave it there. We will not proceed further. We don't want a big stockpile. We are not in a race with anybody. And that is why you had to balance out the need for a nuclear weapons program in India, if only to deter a nuclear war against India.
Shakti, personally, me, I think it's the thing Vajpayee have demonstrated for the country. And I think this strength has gone, as I said, from strength to strength in all directions. So it was possibly the starting point or turning point in a declaration of India as a power unto itself, which could challenge any existing powers and, in fact, go further than the other powers, I might say. Let me shift to another aspect of Vajpayee at this point of time, which is again one of the most significant. I think Vajpayee, in addition to being a statesman, was considered one of the most strongest proponents of foreign policy and foreign affairs. I think his role as a minister of external affairs, as much as his role in foreign policy, is something which has gone down the test of time and withstood a number of scrutiny. So here, Shakti, I will put to you three of I'm sorry. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Uh, so I was talking to you about Vajpayee's policy qua Pakistan, China, and US. I will not talk about more of it from my end. I think I will leave it for you to address, because there has been these open declarations of different kinds which Vajpayee did, but each of them to put us in a position of strength as far as our country is concerned. And I think that has taken us again a long way. So I will leave it to you, to Shakti, for the time being, to address that response.
But you see, partition, but now that Pakistan is in existence, we have to deal with Pakistan as a great power. If there is instability in India's own back here, I think.
There's a lot of disturbance, but I can, from time to time, I be able to hear you. Yeah.
Pakistan is your neighbor, whether you like it or not. You cannot change your neighbors. You can change your friends. You have to manage your neighborhood. If there's instability in your neighborhood, India cannot rise beyond South Asia. India had to rise beyond South Asia. And therefore, the constant need to come to some accommodation with Pakistan. Literally in a position strong enough economically, politically to wage a war against Pakistan. And war is the last thing you should think about, even a limited war. And therefore, he wanted to engage with Pakistan, one, to settle the neighborhood so India could rise, and the second, to dehyphenate India and Pakistan. The world saw India, Pakistan with one eye. We wanted to say, no, we are a bigger power, a responsible power. You can't Pakistan. And then also, we did not cross the LOC to tell the world we're a responsible nuclear power. We cannot allow a war to happen. China is your neighbor. China is your potential threat. See, always has been every prime minister. You don't know how much to accommodate and how aggressive to become with them. Now they are much bigger than us. Vajpayee's time, it was not much difference. The need to engage with China was very important. Your neighbor, your potential economic partner, and you also did not want to get in a state of conflict with China unnecessarily. Comes in a unipolar world at the end of the Cold War, end of Soviet Union, you had no friends. Nations over Kashmir, Human Rights Commission, the US Undersecretary could come and abuse you. You had to make friends with America because as democracies, as people who believed in a rules-based liberal world order, you had to work with America. So it was very brave on Mr. Vajpayee's part to call USA India's natural ally, not as a subordinate, but as a partner, because you needed that in the changing world, you and America must be on the same side. I would rise. You are China's neighbor. USA is not China's neighbor. But you were also afraid, and there I think Mr. Vajpayee was extra cautious in not pushing China. He did not want to form part of any alliance to contain China. And therefore, he wanted good relations with China, not to become overly dependent on the Americas. So I think it was this dynamic between India, Pakistan, China, and the USA that dictated his policies towards them. Some of it very valid. Had he not tried to accommodate Pakistan in the Kargil war, the world would not have supported India. The Bangladesh war, 104 countries out of 120 then in the United Nations voted for a ceasefire against our interests. Kargil war, nothing like that happened. The world saw India differently. And that is why it was necessary to show that extra accommodation to Pakistan, even though it did not pay off. Pakistan is still as it ever was. So it was India's strength.
Let me at this point ask you, since we have talked about the Kargil war, again, one of the most significant features during Vajpayee's regime. How do you think Vajpayee reacted to Kargil war itself?
The army was not happy about Lahore. We did not know how unhappy they were. So we were caught by surprise. We were caught napping, to be fair. But then once its realization was there that it was the Pakistani army which had crossed the line of control, the Pakistani army and not the Mujahideen occupying heights, then the determination was clear. We shall evict them come what may. The country will pay the price. We will evict them. A complete open, except for two, for war. We will not cross the LOC. We will not widen the war to other sectors. These two are controversial, were required because nuclear war was there. Pakistan was a nuclear weapon state. If Pakistan could invade India, you know what? Nuclear war. You world, we are conscious of our responsibility as a nuclear weapon state. We are not Pakistan. We will try and contain the war. Because things you can start them, you can't stop them. We were very clear. We wanted the end of the, but we're also clear. We will not stop the war till Pakistan vacates every inch of territory that they've intruded upon. And through the Blair House Agreement and our military strong response, we got that. So a mixture of very robust defense, but a sense of responsibility. I am a nuclear weapon state. I cannot act in an adventuresome, gung-ho, gun on the hips kind of a situation. You have to be very, very clear,
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I mean, the whole interaction is to be such that we can actually face the adversities and ensure that there is no further adversity rather than just demonstrating the fact. One is demonstrating, one is actually taking action. And which you rightly said, the idea was not to take the gun from your hip and actually shoot it, but to have the gun on your hip so that you said, if anybody shoots me, I will shoot them. And that is the broad principle on how we proceeded. Shakti, let's shift again. We've been talking about the wars, we've been talking about nuclear capacities, we've been talking about the lines of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, and Jai Vigyan, which Vajpayee ji was well known for. In fact, he actually highlighted the importance of science. I think that was, again, one of the hallmarks of his statements. But let's talk about the economic expansion. I mean, when I traveled campaigning for the party through the country and other occasions, whenever I saw, one of the most significant contributors has been the economic expansion that India has seen. And this possibly we could put it as a starting point. Between 99 and 2004, the GDP of India was about 6%. When Vajpayee ji left the office, the GDP had grown to 8%. I mean, I can identify various factors, either as a lawyer or as a policy thinker or as a public person, which includes disinvestment, which includes securitization and bad debts, which includes the infrastructure projects, which includes the Shiksha Abhiyans, whichever way you take it, it includes the telecom sector. Would you like to just talk about some of these features that Vajpayee ji has done to contribute the way ahead?
My book does not have too much of it because my book ends in 99. But the first step, the highway program, to create India as one country, you need the highways as a backbone. Telecom, both roads and telecom were seen as elite subjects. People need cars, people need phones. No, the country needs roads for its economy. Trucks move, buses produce in the Kasbah. We can travel somewhere else and get better wages. You needed this roads project, the national highways and the Gram Sadak Yojana. This was one of the biggest challenges that India faced, bad connectivity. Telecom, we had a bad telecom policy of 1994, which meant that 16 rupees was the call rate for 3-minute incoming call and outgoing call. 16 rupees in those days. It's like 100 rupees today. Market wasn't taking off. You have to break that model. Because ultimately, telecom again is required. Today, who uses telecom maximum in Delhi? Our vegetable vendor requires it. The buyer who goes to 5 houses, she requires it. The plumber, the electrician. So, to suddenly make that difference, I think Indian economic growth was very different had we not made that telecom breakthrough. Very courageous, attacked in parliament, taken to the courts even court's order. And here again, Delhi High Court said, yeah, though it's a policy, executive policy, why don't you get parliamentary endorsement to it? And because there was no parliament, we had to wait for 6 months, And then, of course, he used the word disinvestment. He moved beyond disinvestment to privatization. These companies should better run in the private sector. A lot of good things started moving then. The first step towards GST, the VAT process started then through SENVAT. A lot of simplifications of tax laws, bringing down the rates, reducing the number of rates. A lot of that would have happened in that period. Unfortunately, that 2004, the government had to go. Had the government stayed on, you would have seen a different India. You would have seen a much stronger India by 2014. And not that India, which grew well for 5 years and then floundered for 5 years, Those years really made a difference to the way India is today, the way India looks the world looks at India. Very, very different. Yeah.
That's why, Shakti, I said to you in the first instance that your book goes up to a point. So you have the next points that you already are can start out thinking with. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you this. You probably know that already. So you can consider that as a consideration for a future aspect. But I do believe that Vajpayee ji is mooted and thought of as an ideologue, as a moderate thinker, etc. But his contribution on the economic field and the way ahead in sectors which you rightly said were not even considered the mainframes at that point of time. Today, of course, we see and we look behind retrospectively, you find how significant they are. Is something which was amazing forethought on his part, which he could actually think ahead for the country and the way forward. Um, what do you think as far as Vajpayee ji is concerned? I was seeing from your book again, Shakti. I will draw to you page 332 of your book. Yes. Um, and of course, a great book and something that needs to be looked at not once but a couple of times over. Shakti, I might add that for all the viewers also, it needs to be considered at length. So 337. I like this as a thought, and I take it from the middle of the paragraph where you said it was not that Vajpayee was ambitious about what he stood for. Rather, he was not an ideologue, which meant his worldview was not rigid or dogmatic. The concept was always a factor, whether it meant dissolving the Janasangh in the larger corporate identity of the Janata Party to secure or rescue democracy, or making Gandhian socialism the slogan of the newly formed Bharatiya Janata Party in order to distinguish it from the Janasangh and widen its appeal. It also meant temporarily shelving three controversial issues: abrogation of Article 370, establishment of the Uniform Civil Code, and the Ram Janmabhoomi. I'll just pause for a moment. By now, two of these issues have been covered. But that's, of course, we all know that. When the national agenda for governance was negotiated in 1998, so that several non Congress parties could come together on the common platform of the NDA. In fact, when he was taunted Vajpayee, the BJP here, to say, what do you think? A very good functioning as in the regime of coalition politics. What do you have to say, one, on the front of this paragraph that I have read out to you, and secondly, that is your own paragraph, and secondly, about coalition politics in this country?
Of the line again, which explains what Vajpayee said about three items. He said, in fact, when he was taunted during the 1998 conference, what issues from the national agenda, Vajpayee said this was done because the BJP did not have a majority. He never disowned these fundamental things. So, it's, as I said, he said so in public. Yes, this is a compromise we are making because it's a larger coalition government. And that's the second question, is that when you form a coalition government, you work on the common grounds. What are the common issues we agree on? And through a process of confidence building, to try and expand that area of convergence. Parties have a lot of convergences, a lot of divergences. So how in a coalition you can reduce the divergences and increase the convergences? So I think that was clearly that Vajpayee and the BJP realized that to stay in power was important. We will compromise on these three items, but on certain issues we will not compromise. Ultimately, his government fell because they did not compromise with Jayalalitha enough. The government had to go, it went. So you do compromise in a coalition government, but you sometimes draw the line thus far and no further. So in that sense, it was a compromise. Yeah.
Well known for that part of it, and well known that today coalition politics is something that is coming in front in all the various parts of the country, and something that we have to contend with. The question of rightness or wrongness is not there. The question is what is needed at the point of time and what is needed to be considered for purpose of that. But I think we need to draw strength from the fact that we need to have stronger issues to coalesce, if I might say so. And the Mahagathbandhans are highly questionable at various points of time, but that is only my comment, and of course will not necessarily go to you. So I just have to ask the organizers if they have any questions, because I couldn't find any. on the chat box, the question and answers. If not, Shakti, I will do two things unless I'm interrupted here. One, what is your final view as a last statement on your book? And then I have a small poem of Vajpayeeji's to wind up the afternoon with.
The book, I've tried my best to be fair. Obviously, we carry our biases with us. I tried my best to be as objective as possible to bring out all the facts, including the fact that Vajpayee was conflicted or that there were problems because of BJP's own problem. I've not hidden the fact. I felt that we owe it to contemporary Indian history that we study these aspects of our better. So it's my little attempt to do a bit of history writing to correct common perceptions of that period. Perceptions of Vajpayee being loved by everybody, but why we were attacking, but he was being attacked on a daily basis. He was being called all sorts of names on a daily basis. So I just wanted to bring this out so that people have a better sense of history and not have a very romantic, rosy-hued sense of history.
No, you're right. History should be remembered the way it is. Of course, it is also remembered the way it is written. So it will be remembered also in perception as Shakti Sinha is writing about history. Shakti, indeed a delightful book. But just to wind up the afternoon, as I said, I would read one of my very favorite poems of Vajpayeeji's, which we have grown up with, and which stands for the greatest thing, that is nationalism. भारत जमीन का टुकड़ा नहीं, जीता जागता राष्ट्र पुरुष है. हिमाचल मस्तक है, कश्मीर किरीट है. पंजाब और बंगाल दो विशाल कंधे हैं. पूर्वी और पश्चिमी घाट दो विशाल जंगाएं हैं. कन्याकुमारी इसके चरण है, सागर इसके पग पखारता है. ये चंदन की भूमि है, अभिनंदन की भूमि है. ये तर्पण की भूमि है, ये अर्पण की भूमि है. इसका कंकर कंकर शंकर है, इसका बिंदु बिंदु गंगा जल है. हम जिएंगे तो इसके लिए, मरेंगे तो इसके लिए. I think a very simple poem, a very short poem, but something that reflects to us all that we stand for and all of us stand for, that is nationalism, which is the greatest thing that we can give to our country. So with this, Shakti, I thank you very much for being part of this conversation. And I have learned a lot from you, and I look forward to have another conversation where I can build this forward. Thank you, Shakti. Thank you, everybody.
I thought that was the most fascinating book discussion. Mr. Sinha, I must confess, I have not yet read the book, but after listening to the discussion, I am extremely motivated to pick up a copy and read this book. We were hampered a little bit by some audio issues at your end and occasionally some network issues, I think, at Pinky's end. But Pinky, I must say that you handled those interruptions with the aplomb that I have come to expect of you. So thank you very much. And I would now request Mr. Ramesh Chandra to take over.
Thank you very much for giving us such a stimulating and invigorating session. And on behalf of Vasant Vihar community, we would like to present a small token of our affection for your participation here. And though we would have loved to give it to you personally, but we will see to it that it reaches you home. Thank you very much for being a part of such a stimulating discussion. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, both of you. We would now be, viewers, this is just a message that we would now be taking a break. That's the end of the pre-lunch session. We are taking a break for lunch. You're most welcome to come to the club. We have some very interesting menus set up for you. Or feel free to call for home delivery. And we shall reconverge at 3 p.m. Where we would be showcasing the local talent, young talent. So please do not miss that one. And of course, as the day proceeds, we have a few other very, very interesting sessions. So thank you from all of us at Vasant Vihar Club for the first half of the session today. And we shall reconverge once again at 3 p.m.